Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. So, welcome to the Wisdom of Larry Namer. We live in an increasingly complex world, lots of issues sort of confronting everybody, and business may well be one of the most powerful forces for good on the planet in the hands of the right leaders. And the right leaders are the deeper thinkers, the purveyors of wisdom, the people that understand the consequence of decisions they're making and also take the responsibility of those decisions and apply some real genius within their domain. And I think these leaders are leading a renaissance of wisdom for everybody to be able to learn from. And the goals of this show is to explore that wisdom-driven series of decisions and actions and principles that these leaders have lived by. And today, I, with great pleasure and honor, would love to welcome the founder of Entertainment, of course, the show that everyone grew up on over several generations, and so many other significant ventures in the media industry that match potentially what he is doing in terms of being groundbreaking and everything else. So Larry Namer, welcome to the show. And I really appreciate spending this time with us. No doubt you're a tremendously busy individual, so I appreciate the time greatly, and welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're thrilled to have you here. And I just want to touch base. I don't want to, read through the awkward bio that has you sitting there for several minutes while I barrel through it, other than to summarize a few key things, because obviously your name is intrinsically linked with Entertainment, and that's raised decades of people. It's been such an influence on pop culture over all those times. I think I read that it is in about 146 countries or something like that. The company itself is valued over at $5 billion today, and you're the founder of that. That's no small feat, but you've also got a great footprint in entertainment in the Asian market. You're a co-founder of Metan Global Entertainment Group, bringing media specifically to the Chinese speaking audiences, and in China and abroad, of course. I think you you've co-written a show that is now showing. That's kind of interesting. How does that come about?
No, actually, it's funny. I decided in my ripe old age that I'm pretty funny. So I decided that I'm going to write comedy, which, everybody says the hardest thing in the world to do is write comedy. And certainly you can never write comedy in a language you don't speak, in a country you didn't grow up in. And I said, okay, that's the challenge I needed. So I wrote a comedy about the contradictions of modern Chinese life.
Right.
What happens when you have incredible economic growth in a short period of time, and people's social skills don't grow as quickly as their bank account. We've seen it with the Russians, we've seen it with the Chinese, we've seen it with, the Arab countries and the Japanese, et cetera. It's, the theory for those countries is if you have money, wear it. So Gucci this and Prada that and the gold chains and all that. So I wrote this comedy, and, at first their reaction was, well, this is great, but we can't show it because you're an American and we're Communist Party television. But then, the biggest channel in China, which is CCTV8, they apologize that they only reach 1.1 billion people. They loved it, went to the propaganda department with it. And of course, in China, they do have a propaganda department, and they approved it. And so we made this comedy, and it ran incredibly, 72 episodes, and was actually nominated at the Asia TV Awards in the sitcom category, and it was the only one from China nominated that year.
Wow.
So I thought, wow, that's actually pretty cool. I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's very cool. The story itself is fascinating, but it is because comedy is so nuanced, right? And is generally pretty culturally specific. Like if I think about, Australian comedy compared to British comedy compared to, say, American comedy, you know, the British show The Office that then went to America had to be nuanced quite differently for American television. So how did you grab the nuances? Because you're writing about almost a Western perspective into China, and the nuances is what makes comedy work. How did you grab them?
Yeah, well, the one thing we did in China, which was turned out to be the most important thing we did, was in the US, we would bring in interns from USC and UCLA and stuff. And the caveat was they had to be born in China and they had to want to return to China. So we didn't want anybody who wanted to stay in the US. So then
Interesting.
we took out of the interns, we gave the best ones some jobs, kind of lower level. And then the ones that were really good, we gave like real jobs, and they went back to Beijing and work in the Beijing office. So I surrounded myself with young folks. I think the average age in the company when it was about 26, um, who grew up there, who went to school in the West, so they spoke English. And so I had this incredibly great team around me, that I could, kind of like my ideas are pretty goofy. Early was my sensibility, which is, Hollywood is funny stuff. Don't try and make believe it's rocket science. And, things like Talk Soup and Howard Stern, the Hollywood True Stories. And so I had this great group to work with. So it was really a group effort. And I would say, hey, what about this? And they would say, no, that's not the way we do it in China. So it was very collaborative and stuff like that. So it took my silly and combined it with their silly, and we came out with a hit.
Fantastic. Your bio will be accompanying the show, so people will be able to see, your many awards and achievements and things like that. But to have been such a key player in media and entertainment around the world, and not just within, English speaking countries, Western developed countries, but in every, the broad range of cultural differences you can imagine is quite something. The truth is you're a visionary of the media and entertainment industry. You are one of the visionaries. People would have to look at that and agree with that. Are there other, who are the big visionaries that you look at and go, they were the people that shaped the power of media and entertainment, right, is huge. So who are the visionaries that you would look at and go, they really shaped the industry to where we are today?
Well, the folks that I look at here, I look at, actually, um, not Rupert Murdoch per se, but there were a lot of people around Rupert.
Yeah.
Actually a guy that ran Europe for Rupert, Marty Pompadour. He was located in London and stuff. He I thought was very visionary. Here in the U.S., actually, it's interesting because I'm going Sunday to the Saturn Awards, which are the sci-fi awards, and I normally don't go to it, but I was invited to actually go and sit with Christopher Nolan and J.J. Abrams and Keanu Reeves and stuff like that. I said, okay, that's cool, and I do that. But, I mean, it's those people. I mean, Keanu's wonderful. He's an amazing character. He represents what all actors should be in terms of, their humility and their giving back. And, and then just on a creative level, I look at Christopher Nolan and I look at that body of work and I go, oh my God, one day I want to grow up to be able to do that kind of stuff.
That's pretty, it's interesting. One of the recurring themes that keeps coming through in these interviews that I have with people, great leaders, humility, gratitude, and a sense of something bigger to contribute to are the repeat themes that keep coming up. And I don't mean humility in terms of shy and stepping back. There's got to be a certain amount of ego and self-awareness to drive yourself forward, but humility in terms of how they think about other people. It's interesting you make that comment about Keanu Reeves, who also seems to be one of the most loved actors on the planet. I've never ever seen anything bad written about the fellow.
No, Keanu just does, amazing stuff and he gets back. And then, I think you got to look today as, as crazy as the frenzy has gotten, the whole Taylor Swift thing. And, she's done amazingly well, with her talents and stuff. But, people don't realize for every city that she plays, she then leaves that city by making a donation to homeless shelters and stuff like that. And she's given the truck drivers on her tour, she allocated $50 million in bonuses to the truck
Mm,
drivers. You got to look at that and say, okay, she gets it.
yeah,
And not only does she get it, but it's smart business.
yeah,
It comes back to pay her in spades.
yeah. Oh, and you know, she really gets her fan base too.
Yeah.
She really gets her fan base and cares for them greatly. And I don't know if the people watching this show, the demographic might not all be into Taylor Swift, but I've been saying for years, you cannot ignore the business she's built. Put aside the music that she's creating. She's a smart girl that's built and taken on some pretty big challenges, around streaming and things like that, and on behalf of other people in the industry.
And her battle, I mean, being a female in what was a pretty male dominated business, she stood up for herself and she battled for her creative rights and she won. So you got to give
Yeah,
her a lot of credit.
fabulous. So I'm just um I'd like to go back to e-entertainment just for a little bit. And you've made a couple of interesting comments, which I would love you to expand on as well. You said when you decided to do the comedy show in China, one of the most important things that you did was hire people who were Chinese and wanted to go back and live in China. Then you talked about Rupert Murdoch had a key person or key people around him. And I think it's worth exploring. You know, do you often look for what's the critical thing or the one key thing or the two or three key things we have to do to make this thing work? And how often is that about certain people or having the right certain people?
Oh, it's definitely, I know how to manage really smart people. I think my skill is I know how to manage really smart people.
Yeah,
And I just hire the smartest folks I could find. Who again, I think they gotta kind of match kind of my take on life and my sense of humor, which again, I'm silly.
mm,
And so I got to make sure they're capable of dealing with that. And we don't operate with a heck of a lot of structure.
yep,
Um, we free form a lot, and I've always been one that, and people hate when I say this, I don't really rely on market research. Um, I found that particularly in the media world, when you try and do something that is not done before, the people ask you, they go, well, what's it like? And I'm going, it's not like anything. It's new.
yeah,
And you got to get people who are used to that. And I just found if you do market research and you say to people, just imagine, that's it. You've lost them. They can't imagine. That's why you are, that's why I am who I am, or, people in the business are. So I learned that on a lot of stuff, like if my gut says it's right, just do it. And, forget about what the research tells you.
yeah. It's an interesting comment. Our primary business, we work with companies and I've figured out how to map the genius of an entire company into a visual framework, a model, right? And the problem is the marketplace doesn't know how to buy your intuitive genius, that line. Just imagine the market
Yeah.
doesn't know how to buy that. And so they also don't know how to explain to you that that's what they want ahead of time, right? And so the most innovative people seem to be able to capture that cloud, if you like, and give the thought structure. I think it's interesting the difference between the structure of an organization versus the structure of the thought or the genius behind it. If you can give people that kind of clarity, they will often do magic themselves. I'm interested in you're right. The marketing experts would not like to hear you saying that, but I have a problem with the term thought leader because to be a thought leader, you need original thought and you need followers. And if you lack either of those, then you're not a thought leader. And there's there's not as much original thought around these days. I think the fear that people have of making mistakes, and I'm concerned where AI might take us in terms of original thinking. People jump into chat GPT rather than sit down and write creatively in the first instance and things like that. And at the same time, AI is one of our greatest innovations. I know you've spoken on AI and media and entertainment, but I'd love to start to dig into the emerging trends and technologies and just your perspective on some of these things.
Sure. I've always been one, some of my theories, right or wrong, is, first, Hollywood is not really a geographic place anymore. It's kind of a measure of quality and creativity and stuff. And, that's changed. And the technology of the media business has changed. And I think, we should have learned the lesson. I'm not saying we have learned it, that we're not going to stop technology. When a lot of good stuff can come out of it, it's going to happen. The question is, how do you curtail the bad stuff that could come out of it? In the case of AI, I'll give you a good example. If you were to say, Larry, could you write us a series, TV series summary for me, and it would take me 5 days to do it. I've been using ChatGPT from the original and now GPT-4 and some of the others. It takes it 30 seconds to spit out that, and then it takes me about an hour to edit it. It's never 100%. It's 90% all the time. But now in 1 hour, I've got what used to take me 5 days. And as a creative, I go, you know what? Now I got a new grandson. I got time to play with my grandson. I got time with my kids. I can create more stuff. I can learn how to play pickleball. I can reclaim a lot of my time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good. But on the negative side, there is an opportunity for bad people to do bad stuff. And a lot of it really, in my mind, there's several things have to happen. Number one, our legislators and our politicians need to really get a grasp on what it is. Just saying, oh, we're never going to let that happen, that's not going to work. They have to really understand it. And a simple thing. A 12-year-old feels like, hey, I want to go out and start driving a car. Well, you know what? You're 12 years old. You can't drive the car. And you know what? When you get to driving age, you've got to take lessons. Then you've got to take a test. And then there are rules of the road that you have to obey, or there's punishment for it, including revoking the license, which allowed you to do it. We need something in place like that. It at least provides a deterrent for bad people to do bad stuff. There's got to be a penalty. If you do something bad, you got to pay a penalty. Right now, there is none. It's kind of the Wild West. But then you get to the whole issue of, and it's a much deeper philosophical conversation about, if I were to say, could you do me a favor and take a knife and stick it in Isabel? You'd go, whoa, I can't do that. Well, let's get to why you can't do that. And you were born into a family situation. You had a family that brought you up and started to instill values. Then you had an education, which again brought more value, and then you existed in society. So if I tell you to do something bad, you can't do it. Yeah. Well, we've got to look at AI avatars, or whatever you want to call them. When they start out, they're basically psychopathic. I mean, they don't have any sense of what's right or what's wrong, because they didn't have that growth, foundation that we as human beings have had. So somehow we need to think of, how do we instill in AI models the things that help us understand the difference between right or wrong, the difference, how do we become empathetic, and stuff like that. So there are things that need to be done, but they can be done if we pay attention.
Yeah, so, AI, and we use AI a lot in our business. And, if you're in business today and you're not using AI, you will get left behind.
Yeah.
You must. But AI, I am deeply focused on context in every situation. Context gives everything meaning. If I show a photo of 3 male bald heads from the back, the same person, but 3 times, the context you attach to that image places an entirely different meaning on it. Skinhead thug, Marine, cancer survivor. The context defines the meaning, right? And the AI tools, as they are at the moment, have no context. As you're saying, they have no values-based context. They don't even have purpose-based context. That's in the hands of the user. and a scalpel can heal and harm depending on who's holding it. So, we do, and regulation almost seems to be falling further and further behind the pace of technology, and the slow pace of figuring out how to put the boundaries and guardrails around this seems to be becoming increasingly more challenging because of the rate at which technology is moving. Some of your other things you're involved in now, like Diamond Lake Minerals and Nova Vita, and I'm really interested in conscious parenting and what that's about. But Diamond Lake Minerals isn't a mining company in a traditional way that people, when they see the word minerals, it's quite different, right? It's how do we impact through use of technology
how do we use all this new stuff
yeah.
to bring about good, and I get accused of being one of the people that unveiled reality television on the world. And I was actually, myself and a friend named Blake Mykowski, we were going to do a reality channel. But then Rupert decided he was going to do one. We figured there wasn't enough room for both of us. But, Blake went on and started this thing called Tom's Shoes. And Tom's Shoes is every time you buy a pair, he gives 2 pairs of shoes away to some kid in the Amazon who doesn't have shoes. And it created this whole consciousness among a lot of businesses that, you can't just look at profits. You have to give back a little. And, we look at what's our purpose here on earth. And we're supposed to leave it in a better place than we found it in every way possible. And, we got to figure out how we kind of harness all that stuff.
I'm really very focused on the concept of stewardship as opposed to leadership. The idea of take the gifts that you've been given and return them with increase, to where they came from. So whatever you've been able to achieve in the world, a lot of that was a gift. The biggest gift in life is where we were born and who we were born to, which you have no influence over. So that's a lottery. So, take what you've been gifted and return it with increase. And so, I think we speak a lot about leadership. We don't speak enough about stewardship and the responsibilities that actually go with that. You're obviously, I'd love to dig into the conscious parenting piece.
Sure.
I think that,
that's
an interesting space.
After years of people, hating on me for creation of, things like the Kardashians and, that kind of stuff, I started doing, what I consider some fairly socially responsible stuff. So working with a woman, actually, she's a Caucasian woman, but lived in Hong Kong for the last 25 years. She goes all around the world doing TED Talks and teaching this thing called conscious parenting. And at first I was like, oh my God, that's so boring. It'll never be a TV show. And then I thought about it. And I said, you know what? When I was a kid, my mom took me home from the hospital. My grandma lived upstairs. My aunt lived next door. So my mother had the proverbial village. People who knew what you do with this little thing that you get in the hospital. And I said, now, these kids don't even know their grandparents. Go away to university at 17 or 18 years old. They typically go to another state, they get married, they have a kid. And, now you have the baby in the morning, in the afternoon, they hand it to you and they go, here you go. And you're like, what do I do with this? And then, even further, there are so many things that face parents today that, didn't do it. This is the first generation, particularly here in the US, first generation of kids that knows that they will not actually do better than their parents did. See, when I grew up, it was a given that you were going to have better, income in life than your parents. It's not like that anymore. So there's things there. Then you got bullying, you got school shootings, you got gender identification issues, and there's a lot of stuff. And as I've learned, my kids are older now, that, when you used to think, I can't wait till they're 18, they go off to school. Well, it's not like that. You're the parent for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so we developed this series around Catherine Sellery, the speaker. She calls it conscious parenting. And again, when I was a kid, it was like children should be seen and not heard. Now it's like children are people too. You got to treat them as human beings.
Yeah.
And so we developed that series. We're taking it out now to most of the streamers, Netflix and Amazon and stuff like that. So we're doing that. We've got another one that we just started working on now called Uncanceled, which really deals about cancel culture here in the US. And, you know, people think that right or wrong, you could erase history by like removing, you know, and again, my example there, I grew up learning about the music business by reading Rolling Stone magazine and Jan Wenner. And, you know, a few months back, Jan said something really dumb, politically incorrect. And yeah, I didn't agree with it. It was stupid. You know, I go, that's stupid. What was he thinking? And they took him out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And
Yeah.
how crazy is that? I mean, he's part of the history of rock and roll. We can't avoid that. We could say he's stupid, I'm never reading the magazine again. But, you know, how do you take him out of history? And on and on and on. You know, we see that happening not just in the US, but all around the world, where we're just trying to change what was because we didn't like what it was, as opposed to try and learn from what it was and stuff like that. So we're doing a series called Uncanceled with Lisa Heisha. Lisa's a journalist who she's tough, but she's fair. So we're going to give people the opportunity to tell their side of the story, but not just say, you know, you've got free reign to say whatever you want. Lisa will be challenging. So
Yeah.
we're working on that, and we're doing actually here in the U.S. there's no women in late night television in the U.S. It's all male comedians. So we've
Yeah.
actually got Natasha Graziano, who's a young 32-year-old single mom motivational speaker, and we're planning a late night talk show around her that's more about, it's not so much tell me about your next product, Tom Cruise, your next project. It's more about digging into people's, who they really are, what their emotions are, what their values are, and stuff like that. And that was actually, we've got a lot of 6 networks now are like interested in that show. So we're trying to figure out what the best home for it is. So
Fantastic. Sounds, I mean, you're right, actually. I'd never thought about that, but there are no women in late night television. And, you know, they're very similar across the board as well, the shows, the format
the
and
same
how they
part.
do it and everything else. And once
Yeah.
again, an industries do this. You know, the industries get into a pattern that is safe for everyone in the industry, but the people that really lead at some point find the tipping point where they can shake up an industry. You know, it's an interesting comment you made about history and cancel culture. I have real concerns that our approach today in regard to things that happened in the past that we don't like is to pretend like they didn't happen.
Yeah.
And that is the worst thing that you could possibly do, because you're bound to make the same mistakes. If you take away all evidence that it actually happened, which is what we do when we, you know, for example, take people out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as opposed to, well, you know, the person's not infallible. They also made some mistakes and said some silly things. I'd love to dig into one of the things that I work through visual models. As I said to you before, you know, we can map the entire genius of a company into a single visual framework. So, for example, you know, if you build ships for the Navy, we can build a model that captures the genius that you bring to the table, that you can explain in about 7 minutes. If you can take a complex thing like that and explain it about 7 minutes, you become an incredibly influential communicator. And one of the things I've been capturing, I have a model I call the wisdom model, and I'm trying to capture the wisdom of people like yourself so it can be rapidly shared with other people. And it's, you know, one of the things that the 3 dimensions that I'm landing on is uniqueness, genius, and presence. By that, I mean, there is something uniquely original about Larry Namer. Your philosophical perspectives on things, your qualifying value set, your purposeful intent in the world, something about your uniqueness that blends with your genius, your anchoring insights, the body of knowledge that you've built up, how you simplify things. And and set context. And then you put that together with your presence. You obviously have the ability to go and influence people when you float a show or get 6 networks to be interested in a new idea compared to an industry. So I'd love to dig into on that uniqueness side, if you think of that as a triangle. What are some of the philosophical perspectives that you maybe don't every time consciously think through, but they are driving perspectives behind almost everything you think about and work through?
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in what I come to later years realize was a poor neighborhood.
Yeah.
We were a multi-ethnic neighborhood. My parents were immigrant stock. My father drove a Pepsi Cola truck. My mother worked for the Department of Welfare in New York. So, we grew up in kind of that world, and we we learned about other cultures because we lived among other cultures. So I was never really afraid of exploring. But a lot of it has to do with just, when I go to other countries, people, how do you, I mean, I had the #1 TV show in Russia for 10 years without speaking Russian. And, and people say, well, how do you do it? And I said, you know what? I liken a lot to, when my father passed, my mother lived in Florida. And I would go to my mother's house and go, oh, this is great. Da, da, da. Tonight I want to go to the Italian restaurant at 8 o'clock. And she'd say, no, we're going to go to the deli at 5:30. And I go, but I don't eat at 5:30. And my mother would say, this is my house. If you don't like the rules, go stay in a hotel. And that kind of is the way I approach going into all these other countries. And he's in 140 some odd countries now. So,
Yeah.
And I'm not there to change their governments, and I'm not there to change their culture.
Yeah.
I'm there to entertain them and hopefully give them a few moments to get away from their problems and, just kind of chill out on the couch with a beer. And so it's kind of being that respectful. In China, everybody says, that's amazing. How are you in China? Because they don't let anybody else in there. And I say, because we realized, when Rupert went in there, Rupert was like, okay, here's what I do in Australia. I'm going to give it to you and I'll dub it in Mandarin for you. And the Chinese were like, hey, we're 1.4 billion people. We really like being Chinese. We're proud to be Chinese. If you don't want to program to our people in our language, you're in the wrong place. And Rupert was in the wrong place. We went in there and studied, like, why was Rupert a failure? And realized what it was. So we go in and other than myself, there's nobody who's not Chinese in the company. We're all Chinese. We program only in Mandarin language, and we program to the taste of what Chinese audiences want. I mean, a good example here in the US, with we had E! News. And, then that kind of turned, that kind of started the ball rolling, and now you have TMZ and, all those people that look to find guys cheating on their wives and expose them and ruin their lives. In China, it's a lot simpler and gentler. So like if we were going to interview Tom Cruise in the US, the crew would go out and go, so tell us about Scientology and, all this bad stuff. And China, they're like, no, we want to know what he does with his kids on the weekend.
Yeah, right.
And what? So we program, when we ask these questions, it's a Chinese host, and we ask the questions that the Chinese audience wants to know about. And the Chinese government has been very appreciative of our taking that approach and, being basically non-political, we're non-judgmental on that stuff. We're there to entertain people and have a good time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I'm going to ask you in a minute and then I'd love to wrap up with just some fast questions at the end. But I'm going to ask you in a minute what from your experience would be the most important piece of wisdom you would share with leaders in business. But we do live in a world now where it seems like business takes on the responsibility for being the moral authority on almost everything. And I'm not sure that everybody wants to buy from companies who are the moral authority on everything, be the moral authority on the thing you do. In your case, you're in the entertainment business, that's where the expertise is. So, and be good. You seem to have unifying values around be good, be a good contributor, be a steward. But what piece of wisdom, if I forced you to distill it down to a single piece of wisdom, I know there's so much you could share. What would be the single most important piece of wisdom that you would share with business folks, younger people coming through that they might not expect necessarily or have thought about?
Yeah, I get asked that similar question a lot. Um, particularly about entrepreneurship and stuff.
Mm.
And today everybody's out there. Well, find your passion and follow your passion.
Yeah.
I'm the most anti-passion person you could possibly find. Not that you can't be passionate about certain things, but I think where a lot of folks get lost, particularly younger people going into business, is they think that, oh, I'm passionate about knitting and sewing and therefore whatever. But you know what? You can't put a roof over your head and you're not going to have enough money to eat by knitting and sewing. So I come up with 10 new ideas every day. I wake up in the morning with new ideas. But I'm really good at self-assessing. So I never go to sleep without going, okay, let me go over this. And 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10 times, I go, boy, those are really dopey ideas. Thing that we all have that's finite is time.
Yeah.
And, and we can't change that. So when you're following your passion, even if it was a good idea at the beginning, maybe it wasn't a good idea. Maybe the business environment has changed. Maybe the world environment has changed. People stick with stuff way too long, as
Mm.
opposed to just get your ego out of the way and go, oops, made a mistake. What's next?
Yeah, right.
And that's what we've been really good at, and I've been really good at. It's just going, that was really dopey. What's next?
Yeah.
And using my time where it really could be beneficial.
Yeah. Well, time beats everybody, right? And time compounds everything. Time compounds bad and time compounds good. So a bad idea just gets worse at a greater rate the longer it goes on, and a good idea gets much better at a greater rate the longer that it goes on. So, learning to, not fail fast, but pull out of it fast if it's
And
not the
it's
right idea.
getting your ego out of the way and just
Yeah.
realizing not everything you're going to come up with is such a good idea.
Yeah. I love,
When you really
sorry.
look at it.
Yeah. I mean, as a succinct wisdom share, this idea of remove your ego, get your ego out of the way. Let the idea be the hero and see if it can be heroic.
Yeah.
And if it can't be heroic, there's 9 other things you're thinking about. Pick the one that's going to be the heroic idea. That's a great bit of advice. I'm going to go into these fast questions in a minute, but a question I'd love to ask you is, if you were me interviewing people of your caliber, what do you think the most important question would be that I could ask them?
Well, I think for most people that I know, it's what's the legacy you want to leave.
Sure.
Uh, I mean, for me, it is. It's like, how do you want, sooner or later, we're all going to be gone. How do you want to be remembered, particularly by your kids?
Yeah.
What are they going to think of dad? Like, was that a good guy? And did he
Yeah.
really do what he was supposed to? So, yeah,
And
legacy.
and so then what is the legacy that you like, when people are talking about you, what would you like to hear them saying?
I think, as used his power in the media to do good in every respect, treating people as people, treating the planet the way we really need to start treating the
Mm.
planet, animal, or, things, and just everything. We need to leave it better than we found it.
Perfect. Thank you. And so I'd like to just move into some fast questions, quick responses,
Sure.
and then we'll wrap it up. If you could time travel to anywhere in history, where would you go to, and what would be the reason for that?
Um, I look at the early stages of Hollywood. Because again, I'm living it, kind of when, all these immigrants came, particularly from Eastern Europe, and started an industry here. All the studios started in the early 1900s and stuff like that. And then you couple that with the Great Gatsby and, the those golden ages and stuff. To me, that's a very interesting period. So.
Sure. And in a similar sort of vein, if you could have been in the room on any significant negotiation that's ever taken place, what would that have been?
Well, after seeing the movie Oppenheimer,
Mhm.
I would really love to understand what was going on in his head knowing what he was about to unleash on the world. And,
Yeah.
because it's got to be astounding, the pressures that were there.
Oh, it's an extraordinary movie. Um, and an even more extraordinary story. You're right. How were they reconciling both sides of what they believed they were doing? One was this is going to end a war, but the other side of it is, this is what we're building,
Yep.
and what we're unleashing. Um, if you could instantly master any skill and without any practice at all, but you knew that that would be instantly valuable to you, what would that skill be?
Well, I hate to say this and people will think it's frivolous, but I'm a wannabe chef. So if I had to, pick a skill, I'm still struggling with like fine French food. I got most of the others down, but improve my cooking skills, as crazy as that may sound.
And why would that be valuable to you?
Because for me, everybody in Hollywood goes to therapists and they lay on couches and stuff. I don't do any of that. Every day I go in the kitchen and I cook because for me that's therapy. It's
Fantastic.
it's the process of cooking and cutting and stuff like that, which I just get lost. I just drift into this other world and it clears my head, and then I'm ready to go back into battle. So
Yeah. I've done a lot of work with elite sporting teams and athletes and the military and anybody that operates in a very high performance environment will tell you it's all about the process, not the end result.
yeah,
And so find the process, and then stick to, if you're 5-0 up in a game of sport because you've been playing an offensive style of game, don't go defensive and hope to shut out follow the process. The outcome will come if the process is right, So that's interesting. And last one, if you could relive one moment of pure happiness from your past, what would that be?
well, birth of my kids for sure. And, more recently, just, right around Christmas, my daughter had a little boy,
Yep.
and I now have my first grandbaby, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm loving it.
So the arrival of new life, really, you
Yeah.
know, are the moments of real joy. So, Larry, I want to thank you. You are, you're um, certainly a high achieving individual. You're absolutely a leader of the media and entertainment world. You're an entrepreneurial leader, and so your time is valuable and important. I really appreciate you giving us this time, being willing to zoom in with some guy in Perth in Western Australia, and share the wisdom. I have no doubt that the people that watch this will get some other interesting ideas about how they deploy themselves into this world of contribution through business and what other avenue. And I also want to thank all the people listening for staying right to the end of this. Notes and information about Larry will be attached to the show as well. Thank you very much, Larry, for taking the time and sharing your leadership wisdom with us.
Great. Thank you.